I'm Roy Smith, I'm the Head of Interdisciplinary Studies, and I deliver a module in biology called Biological Basis of Mental Health, and that's the medium in which I use this audio feedback. The reason I've chosen to develop audio feedback as a means of giving students their information is because of the nature of the assessment in the module. Now, the module focuses on biological research into schizophrenia as a vehicle for understanding how biological methods can be used to understand all sorts of issues in mental health. The module aims to develop skills of critical reading and reflection on the part of the students, and so that requires a portfolio type of assessment rather than any structured essays or examinations. And I found that the quickest and easiest way of giving detailed feedback on the portfolios is to use audio feedback. The portfolios include just about everything that the student does while they're doing each of 4 topics in the module. So we have a 5-week turnaround time for each topic. And what I have to do is give them the feedback for one topic before they hand in the next one, so that they get formative feedback and they're able to improve their performance each time. That puts severe time constraints on reading these portfolios, which can be very large pieces of work. I encourage them to include every item of work that they've done in the background reading, the critical reading of some set research papers that I use, and anything else they've done, classroom discussions, their own chats with their mates, sometimes they talk to relatives, sometimes they've got their own personal perspectives of relatives who've had schizophrenia. And all of that information goes into the portfolio. So these can be massive pieces of work. You cannot mark them as you mark an essay. You cannot rely on style or presentation. You have to look at the content and you have to look at what the student is actually doing with the information. Are they simply regurgitating what they've put in as notes? Are they actually evaluating anything? Are they reading the papers critically? Are they offering opinions and justifying their opinions? So what you do when you're marking these things is you're reading them. You start at the beginning and work through to the end, as you might expect. But all the time you're looking out for points that you need to offer feedback on. Now, I used to do written feedback, and it would be very time consuming because you'd make notes and then type them all up at the end neatly so that they could read the writing and then send them back. And this posed considerable strains in terms of time management. What I realised was I was vocalising all the time I was marking anyway, either internally or externally. And by using audio recording, I could capture all those comments as I went along and simply give the students an MP3 file with my thoughts, and that way they get much more detailed information, page by page, item by item. And I save a lot of time transcribing things from one medium into another. So it's quick, efficient, and the students seem to like it. Taking advice from colleagues in media and learning technologies, I downloaded Audacity, which is free, and I use Audacity, which is a simple to use audio recording package on a PC. It's very intuitive to use. There are lots of buttons to click, but the ones you need are very simple and straightforward. You can edit bits out if you've made a mistake or you think you didn't want to say it quite like that on reflection. You can overwrite, you can re-record, you can do almost anything. And it's all on the screen in front of you. I tend to use headphones and microphone unit, but you don't have to do that. I guess if you've got a webcam or something like that, you can use the microphone on that. So it's nothing very sophisticated. The major issue I had originally was deciding how to get it to the students, and I foolishly saved it all in WAV format to start with, which was very big files, but then I twigged very quickly that MP3 was much more compressed and it gave me smaller files. The file sizes for the portfolios I hand back are typically 6 to 10 megabytes, which equates to something like a megabyte per minute of feedback. The biggest ones are about 17 megabytes when students really go on at length, or I have a lot to say about things. I upload those through Blackboard, so that students can access them through Aston, through the web at Aston or through their email, and they don't seem to complain about download times. I can imagine if you're relying on dial-up, a 10 megabyte file might take a while, but nobody's complained about that. The only negative feedback I ever had was when I first introduced it and somebody played it back in a classroom, a computer room here at Aston, and everybody in the room heard their feedback, which they found slightly worrying. But for the most part, nobody batted an eyelid when I introduced it. It just seemed to be accepted. I found there are a number of advantages of doing this method. One is that it is quick, as I've said several times. You don't have to transcribe anything. You can just record it naturally as you work through the piece of work and then simply hand over the finished file to the student. You can use informality of expression, and you can take your time to explain a point in several different ways, which is what you would do if you had the student in the room with you. And I think that to me is a great strength of this method. It is as if you had the student with you. And the written format is much more formal, and you tend to use much more formal language, which often isn't that clear to students what you're meaning. So you've got the luxury of time, you've got the luxury of explaining things 2 or 3 different ways without taking a lot of time over it. So that's another advantage, I think. You cover more ground, you can cover small points as well as major points, and you can give a much more detailed feedback because you're doing it as you're reading the script. If you think you've missed a point, you can simply go back and say, by the way, I didn't realise, I've forgotten to mention that. And it comes over as very, very natural. It's portable. Students can put it on an MP3 player or on their phone and listen to it on the bus or on a train or in their kitchen. They don't have to be at a computer to get the feedback, as long as they've got the script in front of them if they want to look at it. They don't tend to lose it because they can store it in several different places, and I always have a copy available which I've kept, which I can give to them again. I can send it to them as many times as they like. And I guess there's a risk with electronic feedback that you might get it corrupted, but I think you could put it onto more lasting media. For instance, you could write it to a CD, which I tend to do in case external examiners want to take a look at it. I know that CDs are not permanent, but there's certainly 6 years worth of life in them, which is as long as you want to keep this sort of stuff anyway. Well, I think audio feedback is something that you can use for any student. It's probably not worth it for shorter essays where you can simply write on the script. But for any substantial piece of work that a student is doing, I think it's worth considering. It may not suit everybody, but it works for me, and I can recommend it to people. Distance learning students have got their own feedback needs in any case, but I do think actually having a voice makes sense for distance learning students, because sometimes I think they feel that they're talking to a computer, and that actually the human face of the university isn't there. That's what you miss by distance learning. And having a human voice in your feedback could be quite engaging, I suspect. I think one extra point to say is that really you don't need to be in an audio studio or anything like it to do this. Background ambient noise is not a disadvantage. So I, for instance, work in my own study at home next to the kitchen, so people can hear clattering knives and chopping of parsley and things like that. And it simply gives a bit of depth to the recording and makes it sound even more human.